Our theme, I really like our theme. One heart, one breath, one world. To me, the one heart is love. And one breath, prana, life, and one world. We talk all the time, don't we, about unity and union. So it's like love, life, unity, all the key theosophical principles. And perhaps this talk comes under the heart, the love side of it. So imagine you're standing on the side of a river and you want to reach the village or someplace on the other side. You've got a group of cheerleaders behind you egging you on, so you set off full of determination. But you've forgotten to take the river's current into account, and no matter how hard you strain your muscles, you just cannot overcome it. By the time you reach the other bank, you've been pulled way, way away from the place that you intended to be. We may not like to admit it, but our life follows the same trajectory. As forces beyond our control, they drag us from our chosen path. And it's really important to recognise this fact as just one of the many lessons in life that we all have to learn. This information has come from a really good book by a guy called Darren Brown. The book is called Happy. Most self-help books would suggest that you can fight life's currents with determination and positive thinking. But taking inspiration from ancient Greek and Roman philosophers like the Stoics, the 19th century German thinker Arthur Schopenhauer, as well as modern scientific research, Brown believes that this is simply a recipe for disappointment and frustration. He says, we're better off making our peace with the fact that this is the dynamics of life. Rather than creating a false idea, we can somehow control everything to bring it in line with what our goals are. So a daily pre-meditation could help you to distinguish between the challenges that are within your control and those which must simply be weathered. Why is this so? It seems to me as human beings that we are hardwired to want to control the environment around us. This stems from a fear of the unknown, a fear of change that seems to, in our minds perhaps, bring the unknown a lot closer to us. Change is one of the few constants, and we readily accept the phrase, this too will pass, but somehow we don't actually believe it. We somehow seem to think things will remain the same, and of course they won't. So in The Secret Doctrine, we hear about the law of periodicity, of the ebb and flow of all departments of nature. So too in the human department. It is helpful to one studying this aspect of our nature to realise that the temporary appearance of happiness and distress and their disappearance over time, a bit like the coming and going of winter and summer seasons only, they arise from sense perception, and one must learn to tolerate them without being disturbed. Everything is cyclical in our lifetime and in the universe in general. There is a period in the interim where time just sits still and very present, neither good or bad. An appearance of everything is how it should be. This is where yoga comes in and teaches us to always try to be in the present moment. We all have our life lessons to learn. Some of us are given blessings when we least expect them. Some of us are given distresses when we're not planning for it. Either way, the practice of yoga teaches us to prepare for both the good times and the bad times and be aware that all is temporary. It's this state of mind that cares deeply about the situation or predicament we are in, which is key to our future development. The Buddha tells us the cause of sorrow is desire. Desire for things that are fleeting and once grasped, hold our attention but momentarily before we flit off to some new shining thing like a butterfly in the summer breeze. Like our desires, another fundamental human flaw, one that brings us untold unhappiness, is that we are attached to outcomes of our actions. We try to ensure a good outcome for ourselves or our cause, but this attachment is the very thing that is holding us back. The Bhagavad Gita tells us, when actions are performed, renouncing attachment and desire for the fruits of action, one becomes equal to gain and loss and experiences samatvan, which is sameness. Sameness really meaning neither happy nor sad at happenings or events. It is in this attitude of non-desire and non-attachment to outcomes, and by doing the right action with the right intent, that we begin to live in a way that we do not attract karma to ourselves, both good and bad karma, for each holds us firmly in the grip of cause and effect, which ties us to this wheel of rebirth. Acceptance has a major part to play in how we perceive life and its impacts on the outer and inner person. Instead of fighting against the currents in our life, we can begin to live in harmony with them, taking the opportunities from growth from them as intended by life. It's not so much what happens to us that matters as our attitude towards the happening. We can in fact make ourselves happy under circumstances which would make many people miserable. But this is not easy at first. Our feelings take over, our thoughts take over, driving down the same old grooves, the same old patterns that we've been driving down endlessly for many incarnations. To change, we have to make a conscious effort and apply our willpower to this change, bringing perseverance into the equation. Does this mean we have to turn into a passive creme blancmange, accepting everything that comes our way? Do we do nothing and be but a wallflower? Well, I think perhaps the answer to that is a little bit of yes and a little bit of no. On our spiritual quest, we walk the narrow path between wise tolerance of others and acceptance of people and situations that we may not wish for. But we also hold fast to our principles concerning the right conduct of one's life. I heard some sound advice many years ago that says, give way in the small things, but hold fast when matters of ethical principles are involved. Let's explore some of these a little bit closer. In Madame Blavatsky's Golden Stairs, we hear 3 lines that go like this: a courageous endurance of personal injustice, a brave declaration of principles, a valiant defence of those who are unjustly attacked. Let's start with a courageous endurance of personal injustice. What does this really mean? On one level, it means gritting our teeth to get through the unpleasant experience. But on a deeper level, she might be talking about accepting our personal karma without getting riled up and angry about it. By accepting karma that is due, which is better faced now than put off into the future, we can reap the benefit of the intended lessons now, rather than fearfully trying to avoid the circumstances and learning nothing. It is, after all, a lesson being offered to us, an opportunity to learn more about ourselves, our push buttons, our levels of patience and tolerance. Importantly, it is a chance to put into action our theosophical principles. It is our opportunity for achieving spiritual growth. One might say it is like the butterfly that has to push against the chrysalis shell to get blood pumping into its wings, strengthening them as it does so. These trials are our strengthening. They're the pushing against the shell of our current spiritual limitations. There is a stream of thought that says we ourselves have prearranged such trials before we come into incarnation. We, meaning the I, the ego, the individuality. This does not, however, necessarily mean to sit back and do nothing and be a doormat. One could address the challenging matter with determination, but not with hostility of heart, and only with the best interests of all being our motive. We do our best, but we don't get caught up in the outcomes, and we don't make new karma along the way. Whilst karma is generally associated with sorrow and hardship in the learning stages, it will not always be such a foe. There is an apt passage in a letter from one of HPB's teachers. It says, teach the people to see that life on this earth, even the happiest, is but a burden and an illusion, that it is but our own karma, the cause producing the effect, that is our own judge, our saviour in future lives. And the great struggle for life will soon lose its intensity. HPB herself said, do not be afraid of your difficulties. Do not wish you could be in any other circumstances than you are in. For when you have made the best of an adversity, it becomes a stepping stone to a splendid opportunity. HPB also said, again, the idea of growth involves also the idea of disruption. The inner being must continually burst through its confining shell or encasement, and such a disruption must also be accompanied by pain, not physical but mental and intellectual. And this is how it is in the course of our lives. The trouble that comes upon us is always just the one we feel to be the hardest that could possibly happen. It is always the one thing we feel we cannot possibly bear. If we look at it from a wider point of view, we shall see that we are trying to burst through our shell at its one vulnerable point. Every crushing pain is caused by the expansion of some neglected part. And so when so-called bad things happen to us, especially those that we feel are a personal injustice, we can reflect on this and hope to endure the experience, learn from it, rise above and grow. To help us succeed in this task, this is where a brave declaration of principles comes in. Will we barter our principles away at the first sign of trouble, or will we stand by our principles, knowing it may very well end badly for us? So what are these principles we speak of? In HPB's Key to Theosophy, the inquirer asks, have you any ethical system that you carry out in the society? Theosophist answers, the ethics are there, ready and clear enough for whomsoever would follow them. They are the essence and cream of the world's ethics, gathered from the teachings of all the world's great reformers. Therefore you will find represented therein Confucius, Zoroaster, Lao-tzu, the Bhagavad Gita, the precepts of Gautama Buddha, Jesus of Nazareth, Hillel and his school, as of Pythagoras, Socrates, Plato and their schools. One who undertakes a determined stance to live the inner life faces a considerable battle at nearly every turn in our selfish world. HPB is frank when discussing this aspect and what we can expect. She said that very act rouses and lashes to desperation every sleeping passion of his animal nature. For this is the commencement of a struggle for the mastery in which quarter is neither to be given nor taken. For this reason alone, we must have solid principles at our core to help guide us, and we must be prepared to declare them and live by them. This brings us to the third line, a valiant defence of those who are unjustly attacked. In the voice of the silence, we read, let not the fierce sun dry one tear of pain before thyself has wiped it from the sufferer's eye, but let each burning human tear drop on thy heart, and there remain, nor ever brush it off until the pain that caused it is removed. So in our daily life, for example, perhaps we see bullying in the workplace or at school, and we say something. By putting our head above the parapet, we risk getting it lobbed off. If we do suffer for holding fast to our convictions, then we fall back on our first line, a courageous endurance of personal injustice. This line, a valiant defence of those who are unjustly attacked, is a call to action, being karma yoga, a recognition that each person is a brother or sister. We are fellow pilgrims on this planet and linked as one. Jacinda Ardern said after the Christchurch mosque massacre last year, they are us. which I think describes well the theosophical principle of oneness. We could also say, she is me, he is me. In the Mahatma letters, Master K.H. says, "For it is humanity which is the great orphan, the only disinherited one upon this earth, my friend. And it is the duty of every man who is capable of an unselfish impulse to do something, however little, for its welfare. This is a reminder of our personal responsibility to our brothers and sisters, and may indeed take some courage to fulfill." I want to talk a little bit about intolerance. One of the biggest errors we make is seeing others as separate to ourselves. We perceive the differences and not liking them. This breeds a certain level of contempt and therefore intolerance. Intolerance is the act of not accepting people as they are, or accepting things as they happen. We try and shape them to our own views, instead of letting people find their own way in their own time. We each have our own lessons to learn, and we learn in different ways, some faster, some slower. Ours is not to interfere with their development unless asked to. Voltaire asked, "What is tolerance?" He replied, "It is a necessary consequence of humanity. We are all fallible. Let us then pardon each other's follies. This is the first principle of natural right." We also place far too much importance on the opinion of others. This is not necessary. It means we're not coming from a place of inner poise, but from a place of doubt. We're fumbling in the dark if we live our lives this way. Eckhart Tolle said, "Stop looking outside for scraps of pleasure or fulfillment, for validation, security or love. You have a treasure within that is infinitely greater than anything the world can offer." By living our principles, we may encounter hostility. We need to be prepared for rejection and other results. The good opinion of the crowd, however, that fickle barometer, is really worth having. Master Serapis, in a letter to Colonel Walcott, wrote, "Brother mine, he who cares for the opinion of the multitudes will never soar above the crowd." The exception regarding caring about the good opinion of others is, of course, when we consult our master or acknowledged teacher. If we adhere to living life according to our principles and ethics already worked out, we remain centered. The Buddha's Noble Eightfold Path on living springs to mind here as an excellent guide. By living in such a way as the Buddha and Bhagavad Gita suggest, we become not only happier but healthier. I think that unless there is a specific karmic reason for some disease or ill health, our bodies but reflect what is going on inside of us. By living in harmony with the universe and nature, by accepting life as it comes to us and responding in a loving and giving manner, we start to purify our emotions and mental attitude, and these reflect directly into our physical body. Let's take a look at what some others say around tolerance and acceptance. Less well known is the paradox of tolerance. Unlimited tolerance must lead to the disappearance of tolerance. If we extend unlimited tolerance even to those who are intolerant, if we are not prepared to defend a tolerant society against the onslaught of intolerance, then the tolerant will be destroyed and tolerance with them. That's Karl Popper in the book, The Open Society and Its Enemies. Albert Einstein had this to say, "Laws alone cannot secure freedom of expression. In order that every man presents his views without penalty, there must be a spirit of tolerance in the entire population." The Dalai Lama and the practice of tolerance. One's enemy is the best teacher. Timothy Keller. Tolerance isn't about not having beliefs. It's about how your beliefs lead you to treat people who disagree with you. Ray Davis said, "Tolerance only for those who agree with you is no tolerance at all." Bill Maher said, Don't get so intolerant that you tolerate intolerance. So what is our moral obligation to stand up for what is right versus letting things take their natural course? It's a bit of a hard one. Take, for example, the world wars, 2 world wars in the last century. As a peace-loving person, do you take up arms to defend naked aggression? Thomas Mann, in the book The Magic Mountain, said, "Tolerance becomes a crime when applied to evil." Jeffrey Hodson, a really well-known theosophist, he faced this dilemma himself of tolerance and evil when World War I broke out. He had a difficult time of it. Will he join up or not join up? Because, at heart, he was obviously a pacifist. But in the end, he decided to join the British Army against German aggression because he realised humanity was not at the level whereby such conflicts could be resolved when one party was determined to use force. This too is a valiant defence of those who are unjustly attacked. Tolerance is mentioned in the Vedas. It is called uparati. I don't think it is what we in the West would call putting up with things, where we adopt an attitude of dislike but we remain silent. I think it's more an inner quiet and acceptance that things are working out in the world as they have been planned. Each one of us has a plan coming into this life. It is arriving at that point of balance or equipoise that Jeffrey Hodson called it, that we begin to lead lives of balance and harmony. We can hasten the attainment of this state by the active practice of virtues, according to Buddhism. We do this by transforming destructive energy into positive through the use of mental control and discipline. In Vedanta, these are called the 6 treasures or virtues, and I'd like to comment on 2 of them, acceptance and endurance. Uparati, or tolerance. This is the quiet acceptance of each man, woman and child, each form of existence as it is, without demand that it should be something different, shaped to our own liking. How often is this the cause of pain and sorrow in our relationships? If we feel anger, frustration or agitation, then this is a sure sign that we are not accepting the situation or person as it is, that we are fighting against it to shape outcomes to our own liking. We are often intolerant of others based on our fears. Our attitude on acceptance is just not towards things that have been. What of the future? One of the biggest threats we face is our mind's ability to throw all sorts of stories into our thoughts which play on these fears. We have a small fight with our boss and we think we'll be fired, and we start fretting, how will we pay the rent? We saw our partner laughing with someone. They might be having an affair. I could be on my own again. Others huddled together. Well, they must be gossiping about me, and so forth. These fears can take hold of us, taking us out of living in the now and forcing us to live in some made-up world where the future is bleak, leading to worry and anxiety, etc. I'm sure we all do this to some extent. I know I do. The best advice I've heard when dealing with this comes from the Master KH. He said, "Indulge not in apprehensions of what evil might happen if things should not go as your worldly wisdom thinks they ought. Doubt not, for this complexion of doubt unnerves and pushes back one's progress. To have cheerful confidence and hope is quite another thing from giving way to fool's blind optimism. The wise man never fights misfortune in advance." We now look at titiksha, or endurance. This means an attitude of mind that cheerfully bears all and resents nothing, going straight onwards, unswerving to the goal. It helps to realise that the life of a disciple is generally one of storm and stress, in order that qualities and faculties may be forced into swift growth and speedily brought to perfection. It's a really important point. It is in the silence, it's in the calm that the soul grows. Some say that the soul grows through suffering. This is not exactly so. It is by making mistakes and correcting them that the soul learns how to grow. And suffering invariably comes as a result of the mistakes. But the growth does not take place during the suffering, but afterwards. A person may be very much better after a surgical operation, but the improvement does not take place while the operation is being performed. In like manner, while people who are in the throes of all sorts of terrible difficulties, they are not growing. But by the way in which they meet those difficulties, they may be learning to grow after they have surmounted them. As we hear in Light on the Path, it is in the silence which follows the storm that the flower grows. It is possible that plants may develop strength within themselves by enduring a storm, but growth can only come when the buffeting of the storm is over. We must have gone through the turmoil of battle before we gain that great reward of victory, the real unfoldment of the soul, which brings with it a calm certainty which nothing can ever shake. HPB said, "Woe to those who live without suffering. Stagnation and death are the future of all that vegetates without change. And how can there be any change for the better without proportionate suffering during the preceding stage?" Suffering and forgiveness. Suffering is something we all experience, probably at many points in our life. Our attitude to dealing with this important subject will help shape our ability to voluntarily move beyond suffering and bring acceptance into our life. Suffering is resistance to what is and is created only by oneself. It is a spiritual teacher for some their own spiritual teacher. Suffering deepens us and starts to erode the mind-made sense of small ego. When we reach the point where we're completely fed up with suffering, we begin to understand there is another way to live, one that does not create further suffering. We may not be able to avoid pain, but suffering or non-suffering is in our hands completely, for it is our attitude of mind and our association with desires, ambitions, and sense of personal ego and self. True acceptance leads to forgiveness. Moving beyond suffering and sense of personal injury leads to forgiveness. Forgiveness can be very hard at times, but ultimately it is necessary to healing and moving on. Pema Chodron says, and I'll quote, "There is a simple practice we can do to cultivate forgiveness. First, we acknowledge what we feel, shame, revenge, embarrassment, remorse. Then we forgive ourselves for being human. Then, in the spirit of not wallowing in the pain, we let go and make a fresh start. We don't have to carry the burden with us anymore. We can acknowledge, forgive, and start anew. If we practice this way, little by little, we'll learn to abide with the feeling of regret and having hurt ourselves and others. We will also learn self-forgiveness. Eventually, at our own speed, we'll even find our capacity to forgive those who have done us harm. We will discover forgiveness as a natural expression of the open heart, an expression of our basic goodness. This potential is inherent in every moment. Each moment is an opportunity to make a fresh start." End quote. Those who do us an injury are really messengers of our own karma, deliverers of experiences we need to go through in order to learn and grow. Therefore, be not angry and resentful. Nurture forgiveness, for it is very powerful. In the Mahabharata, the great Indian epic where the famous Bhagavad Gita comes from, it says, "One should forgive under any injury. It has been said that the continuation of the species is due to man's being forgiving. Forgiveness is holiness, By forgiveness, the universe is held together. Forgiveness is the might of the mighty. Forgiveness is sacrifice. Forgiveness is quiet of mind. Forgiveness and gentleness are the qualities of the self-possessed. They represent eternal virtue. Through acceptance, we can learn to use regret in a positive manner. One of the biggest barriers to true acceptance is regret. Regret can be very powerful in self-reflection. It's part of a process of looking at what you want to do differently. For example, if someone's feeling regret that they haven't spent their time well, that they've been too caught up in their busyness of achieving, then they realise their marriage is breaking up. They don't really know their kids. Having regret in that place can become an impetus to make change. Whereas if it comes up and people just stay in that place of regret, it can be really damaging. How can we release ourselves from regret? Trish Everett, a mindset coach, says letting go of regret requires you to look beneath the surface. Once you feel the regret and you take it in and you notice what it's about, then it's done its job, says Trish. Give yourself permission to let go of it then and there. Letting go of it can be as simple as getting back to the present and breathing it out. You can even say to yourself, I let this regret grow. If we wish to extend our attitude of tolerance and acceptance to others, to the world, then we must include ourselves also. The person we often are most hard upon is ourselves. Psychologist Marnie Leishman says we should hold some compassion towards ourselves for not knowing then what we know now. We need to remember that we make decisions in moments in time with what information we have at the time, she says. Hindsight is a wonderful thing, but it's easy to look back on life and say how we would do it differently when we have more information to go on. Psychologist Marnie Leishman's tips for approaching regret. Ask yourself what you can learn from the experience that you can apply the learnings in your life now. Be kind to yourself. You did what you could at the time with what you knew at the time. Realise that often it's not too late to rectify the situation and make them right. It might be recontacting people or undertaking a ritual. I'd like to read a little story on tolerance, returning to tolerance and acceptance. One day the Buddha was giving a lecture to all the monks at Jeta Grove, Shiratsi. He said that long time ago the heavenly god Indra and his hosts of devas waged a battle against the Asuras, and the Asuras are the demons. One day Indra said to the king of Asuras, "Today, let us not count the victory by the amount of bloodshed. Why don't we decide the winner by holding a debate?" In response, the king of the Asuras said, "Certainly, but who will be the judge?" Indra said, "Of the Devas and the Asuras, there are beings of great wisdom and eloquence. Let us have them decide who should be victorious." Then the king of the Asuras replied, "You may speak first." Instead of speaking first, however, the heavenly king humbly said, "I could speak first, but as you are the previous king of the firmament, you should have precedence. Please speak first." The king of the Asuras said, "A foolish person puts up with insults because of fear, and yet prides himself in believing his tolerance makes him superior to the aggressor." Indra rejoined, "Even though a foolish person puts up with the insults because of fear, being tolerant actually brings us the greater benefit. The virtue of tolerance outweighs all the fame and fortune in the world." The king of the Asuras then said, "Lacking wisdom, foolish people need to be forced to do right. They're just like lazy cows that need to be prodded along by the horns of more vigorous cows breathing down their necks from behind. Hence, the best way to control the foolish is by whips and spurs." The heavenly king countered, "I think to control the foolish, forbearance is the best way. When confronted by an agitated person, if one can wait in peace and silence, their fury will die down naturally. A person without hatred or vexations is a saint or a disciple of a saint. This is the kind of person we should draw close to. A person whose mind is loaded with great anger and therefore gets angry easy will encounter obstacles high as a mountain. On the other hand, if one can control one's anger as soon as it arises, like taming a wild horse with a harness, then one will have done a good deed. The Davids and the Assurers, who acted as judges for the debate, thought that the arguments of the king of the Assurers was based on the use of conflict and force, whereas Indra advocated putting arguments and competitions to rest with a mind free of anger and malice. In consequence, all the judges awarded Indra the victory. The Buddha told the monks, Indra is the freest of care in the heavens because he always practiced tolerance and always praises the ways of tolerance. Likewise, if you can practice and praise tolerance, then you are truly leaving the home life. After they heard the Buddha's talk, all the monks felt blessed and pledged to abide by the Buddha's teachings. Eckhart Tolle says, acceptance looks like a passive state, but in reality it brings something entirely new into this world. That peace, a subtle energy vibration, is consciousness. Acceptance is seeing what is, as it really is right now. But of course, this is always through the lens of our own worldview. When misfortune comes our way and hits us hard, as it does to each of us in our life, how do we respond? With negativity, hate, revenge, a strengthening of mistrust in others? Or do we allow it to develop in us compassion, love, tenderness, empathy, acceptance? Which road we travel on depends on how we view things, our worldview, if you will. Wayne Dyer puts it much better than me. He said, with everything that happens to you, you can either feel sorry for yourself or treat what happened as a gift. Everything is either an opportunity to grow or an obstacle to keep you from growing. You get to choose. So a certain worldview might hold that where we find there is evil or bad, we do not need to accept that, but try to see the good in that person. Try to see the beauty, or at least help that person where we can. People are not all good or all bad. Each is trying at their own level, a level determined by circumstances such as early life, nation, social conditions, etc., and of course karma from previous lives. Remember, it is said that the sin and shame of the world too are our sin and shame, for we are part of it. Our karma is inextricably interwoven with the great karma. Try and remember to show the most tolerant to the intolerant, since a vice cannot be corrected by the application of the same vice, but only by the corresponding good. In the voice of the silence, we have our philosophy in a nutshell. Desire nothing, chafe not at karma, nor at nature's changeless laws, but struggle only with the personal, the transitory, the evanescent, and the perishable. By accepting of things as they are, not as we would have them, we can begin to live lives that are in harmony with nature and the universe. We will witness a change in our own fundamental nature. Unhappiness slips away and contentment pervades. The true nature of acceptance enriches both the inner ego and the outer personality of the man or woman. We become that calm centre in the whirlpool of life. Jeffrey Hodson reminds us of this way to complete peace and harmony in his book called The Initiate Life. He said, the part of us which suffers is ahamkara, the sense of I-ness, the delusion of separated self-personality. If we can get rid of this in an utter surrender to the one will and a complete impersonality which literally does not care about the self, then pain on our own account cannot touch us. Personal accusations and affronts, injustices, gossiping will cause us not one moment of personal sorrow. He who has sacrificed self has found the way to peace. Understanding the nature of acceptance is of immeasurable aid to the neophyte as they battle courageously on and eventually stand in awe in the deep silence on the threshold. Reaching out towards the light, the God within responds eagerly with joy. I'd like to leave you with one of the most beautiful and profound pieces of theosophical literature from Light on the Path. It tells us of this long struggle of the soul, surrender of the lower nature to the glorious divine light within, and the courage of the aspirant as the storm of spiritual alchemy rages in and around them. Look for the flower to bloom in the silence that follows the storm. Not till then. It shall grow, it will shoot up, it will make branches and leaves and form buds while the storm continues, while the battle lasts. But not till the whole personality of the man is dissolved and melted. Not until it is held by the divine fragment which has created it as a mere subject for grave experiment and experience. Not until the whole nature has yielded and become subject unto its higher self can the bloom open. Then will come a calm, such as comes in a tropical country after the heavy rain, when nature works so swiftly that one may see her in action. Such a calm will come to the harassed spirit, and in the deep silence the mysterious event will occur which will prove that the way has been found. Thank you.